I am always amazed by nonprofit organizations who build up an army of volunteers to help them do their work. It's got to be a lot of work just to put in, just to recruit, train up, and make sure that these volunteers represent your organization properly. How do they do it? We're going to find out today. I've got Dr. Chad Nelson on the podcast today. He is the CEO of Surfrider, one of the organizations that have one of the largest armies of volunteers that do great work. We're going to hear from them on this episode of the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Surfrider. We're going to be talking about an overview of Surfrider, and I'll tell you, this is just the beginning. I would like to have this organization out more, hear from, obviously Chad, but also from other people within the organization that are doing great work. You're going to hear in this episode Chad talking about, one, how he got a PhD, how he became CEO, where that was in his career trajectory, and how he sort of made that happen, which I think is really, really important. It's been a while since Chad's been on the podcast, and last time he wasn't a PhD or a CEO. We're also going to talk about Surfrider, their overall programs, what they're doing, how many policies they've influenced and gotten passed, whether it be state or even federal, and how they work with other collaborators, but really how they recruit and train and just kind of, mentor their volunteers, and why their volunteers are so happy to be volunteers. They've got a lot of pride in Surfrider, and that takes a lot of work within the Surfrider organization to do that. They only have 65 staff. Last time I talked to them, I think it was half of that, so they've grown quite a bit. So we're going to hear all about that, but you don't want to hear that from me. You want to hear it from Dr. Nelson. So here he is talking about Surfrider, their army of volunteers. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Chad, welcome to the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. Are you ready to talk about Surfrider?
I am.
Right on. I am very excited about this interview because, Chad, it's been a while since we last caught up. The last time you and I spoke, you had a different position. We talked about marine protected areas, which we'll probably get into a little bit today, and how you were working with Surfrider as, I believe it was the Director of Environmental Programs. Is that the right title?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And now your title has changed, which you'll mention in a moment. And a lot of things have changed. So it's going to be a lot of fun to sort of catch up, give a brief description of sort of an overview of Surfrider, and then kind of dive into some of the more relevant programs today. And then I'm sure we'll have you back on definitely in the near future, you and your team, and we can talk more about Surfrider. But I'm super excited about this. So why don't you let us know, just to kind of remind people who weren't there in the beginning when Speak Up for Blue was first started, just let us know who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Dr. Chad Nelson. We can talk about how I got the doctor part.
Yeah.
And because I hadn't finished that when we spoke.
That's right.
I am the CEO of the Surfrider Foundation. And I've been with the organization for over 20 years, and I've been running it for about 7.
Wow. That's that's amazing to be with an organization for that long in this sort of the marine field. Like, the ocean conservation field is definitely a unique situation, unfortunately, but it is a unique situation. So congratulations on that. As you mentioned, a lot has changed since the last time we talked. Not only did you get your PhD, but you became CEO of, I would say, one of the best grassroots organizations in the US, and I think now you guys are in British Columbia as well. So in North America, let's say, so a lot of things have changed. So that's first of all, congratulations on both the PhD, becoming a CEO. Not an easy thing to do. So that's a lot of fun. How did that, if you want to, I'll link to the last podcast so we can get your story in terms of how you started and stuff, because I think it's a really impactful story, because your dad was a marine educator, so you grew up around marine education, and of course, look at you now. You're CEO of one of the, like I said, best grassroots organizations in North America. So that's pretty cool. And so But what I want to kind of get to know is like, why did you go for the PhD? Why was that important to you? And then I'll ask the CEO question in just a sec.
Sure. Well, thanks for all of that.
No
You
problem.
know, I love the job and the profession and all I do. So I just feel really fortunate every day to wake up and do this work. So I went back to UCLA to get my doctorate, and the reason that I did that was sort of twofold, arguably. One is I was doing a marine conservation project in Puerto Rico, trying to establish a marine reserve, which we did at a place called Tres Palmas. There's now this Tres Palmas Marine Reserve, and
Nice.
in trying to work with the fishing community, the local tourism community, and sort of the conservation community, we ran into the classic problem of this is environment versus the economy. And so this marine protected area, this marine reserve, you know, the fishermen and the local tourism were worried that it was going to hurt their local economy. We brought in an economist named Linwood Pendleton. He was at UCLA at the time. He went to Duke and then NOAA, and now he's in France. But
Wow.
and he did a rapid economic assessment of this town and kind of illustrated that the environment is the economy. So people are coming to Rincon, Puerto Rico to surf, to dive, to fish, and to hang out on the beach. And so protecting those natural resources is actually key to the economy. And that study was a game changer for us. All of a sudden, local tourism board, a lot of the fishermen, a lot of the local businesses, instead of seeing this project as something that was going to hurt them, they saw it as something that could potentially help them.
Right.
And it was so powerful. And the Marine Reserve got established. The town is thriving. It's now commonly advertised. It is seen as a gem of the community. We were able to work with the fishermen to sort out some of those no-take issues successfully. And so after doing that project, I saw the value of using economics and conservation. And Linwood, who did that study, recruited me to come back to UCLA and study natural resource economics. They have a very unique program there that is kind of almost the equivalent of like a professional PhD program. So like
Gotcha.
a fully employed MBA. This was like that. You could work and do the program. And so I was able to go back and do the work, the studying, the research, and keep my job at Surfrider. So it was perfect fit. It was a lot of work.
I was just about to say.
I also had like 4-year-old twins when I started that.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was crazy. But and so that was one. So I was like, okay, I want to learn these tools and figure out how I can employ the power of resource economics to support conservation. Just one more argument in the quiver of arguments that we can make to try to protect places. And second of all, I did have ambitions to get this job, the CEO job at Surfrider, or the equivalent elsewhere. And it was my belief that I had a master's in environmental management. I had a good work experience, but I felt like to get those leading jobs, you have to have something special that makes you unique.
Right.
So former CEO of Surfrider was a tech entrepreneur. The guy before that was actually a former district attorney. So there was always some thing out there. So I thought, okay, well, if I go back and do this, I'm going to gain some great skills. I'm going to kind of put myself up in another level of employability to try to lead an organization. So, and both worked. So
it sounds like it did.
It panned out.
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. Doing you kind of said it. It was very hectic doing a PhD, working your other position as a director, and then of course being a father to twins at the time. Well, they're still twins, but 4-year-olds at the time. That's no easy feat. I mean, I remember my supervisor when I did my master's described to me what a PhD is like. And he's like, it's basically having a full-time job plus half of a full-time job. So you had a full-time job plus half of a full-time job with the PhD. Then you had a full-time job with the director position at Surfrider, and then you had another full-time job as a father. I don't know how you did it. I really don't. I think we can do a whole podcast on just how to manage that and not go insane. So congratulations on that. And I agree with you in terms of like how resource economics can really play a role. And we've seen, teams of conservationists and biologists and economists and all sorts of scientists kind of get together to have a lot of those qualities, from your environmental management master's is from Duke. So that's a great program that you went through, because that program covers a lot of different things in and around environmental management and marine conservation. And so now you have the economics. So now you're basically like a team. When you went for the CEO job, now here you are, a doctorate, you successfully defended, you're ready to go out and do all these projects. But as a CEO, you have other duties to do, right? Like you have other responsibilities from a management perspective, like running this organization. That's a pretty large organization. Not only I know the staff is not as large as everybody thinks, but it's still a staff that needs to be sort of directed as a CEO. And then you have this grassroots sort of network that spans across North America. It's not an easy thing to do. So what was your reasoning for going for that CEO position?
I guess it was several things. One, the job opened up at Surfrider, so my former boss was leaving. So, I was like, wow, okay, that opportunity is right in front of me. And so I was like, I had a lot of strong opinions about how I thought we could, lead the organization and do better. And, on some level, it was kind of that next step in my career.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, it was, having been at the organization for so long before that, I thought it was going to be easy, and it turned out not to be as easy as I thought. I've learned a lot in that years, and so I said, hey, I've been living and breathing Surfrider for all this time. Now I have an opportunity to actually really put my fingerprints on where we're headed and what we're up to. So that's kind of why I took a shot at it. And, I was the internal candidate. They looked at a lot of external candidates and ultimately got the gig.
That's awesome. That's not an easy thing to do. I'm sure that the other candidates, are fairly well qualified, and so it's nice to be able to have that. I mean, having someone come up from sort of internally is obviously, and you'd been there for what I believe 16 years at the time.
Yeah.
Before you got the position. So having someone who knows the culture, who knows the people, who's been in a leadership role as well, and you got to do a lot of great things as that director position. So I think I think it's great for the organization to have someone come up with that experience in this kind of role. So I'm glad you're in that role. I'm definitely happy that you're in that role and you got it and so forth. So that's been the last 7 years. A lot of things have changed over the last 7 years, including sort of probably, the way Surfrider does things. From my understanding from our last episode, you guys got into you were into a lot of water quality issues, trying to solve a lot of water quality issues, especially with plastic pollution, water quality in itself with nutrients and so forth. And we talked about marine protected areas and establishing marine reserves and so forth. But it seems like I went on your website to prepare for this interview, and it seems like there are some more programs that are in addition to that, which again is these issues that you're tackling: plastic pollution, ocean protection, beach access, coastal preservation, clean water, and all within that, there's a climate change component that affects all of those, are really important. So did the programs change much over the last 7 years, or even since you started? And then how did they change?
Yeah, they have changed, and it's interesting because it's sort of changed in two ways, right? We're a grassroots organization. We have 80 chapters around the country that work in local communities. So we've always had sort of a community up strategy. And so from the network side, we've really built a robust student club program in high schools and colleges. So now we have over 100 high school and college clubs. So we've more than doubled the size of our network by going to the youth. So sort of the people doing the work in our network has expanded greatly. And, we believe that, motivate, the same reason you have your podcast, motivating the public and giving them tools to take action from the grassroots up is really how you foment lasting and real change. And so sort of from the network side, we've evolved, and that's been hugely positive. And then on the sort of issue side, we were working on plastic pollution. Our thinking there has really evolved. We've passed over 300 laws and policies since we spoke. And so we really started focusing on cutting off plastic at the source.
Right.
And it started with banning single-use bags. And it's really evolved into sort of a state and federal strategy focused on comprehensive reduction of plastic pollution, and a sort of a new thinking has emerged with, I think is really smart, called extended producer responsibility. So this is essentially putting the burden of the plastic pollution problem back on the producers. Who plastic's so cheap, they produce a ton of it. We see it everywhere, and that gets littered and ends up in the ocean. So even though we're still working on plastics, I think our strategy has evolved and become much more sophisticated.
Right.
We helped author a bill called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that's now in Congress. So we're also operating, trying to get stuff done at the federal level. That's been a big change. And then, as you mentioned, climate change, for decades, we've been opposing poorly planned development and seawalls and inappropriate development on beaches. And it was almost all reactive, stop the bad project.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Siri just chimed in. Always listening. So, we were very reactive. We were trying to stop bad projects from happening. And so our thinking there has really evolved. Now we realize, hey, the problem's coming to us with sea level rise and increased storminess. So we really need to focus on coastal adaptation and adapting our coasts to what's coming at us. So just fighting off seawalls is a losing strategy. We need to start thinking about moving back, how we're going to alter our coastlines to, accommodate, a couple feet to 6 feet of sea level rise, which is coming our way.
Yeah.
And so that's been a pretty big shift as well. So, as appropriate, a lot more emphasis on really tackling the climate change problem, which, is the 600-pound gorilla in the room for all of our issues. So
it's huge.
That's been an evolution as well.
Yeah, do you find now you're on the West Coast, correct? You're in California.
Yep.
And Surfrider has a huge presence on that western coastline of North America, like I said, all the way up to British Columbia in Canada. Over the last number of years, in the summertime, there have been, and there still is now, forest fires. Do you find because of those forest fires, a lot of resources get dedicated to forests, and does that take away from the issue of sea level rise?
God, that's a great question. I actually think I don't know, maybe at a federal level, all the money we're spending to fight these fires, which is extraordinary, right? And we're also spending billions of dollars responding to hurricane damage. Speaking of economics, right? The cost of not doing anything is so huge. We haven't made, I think, as an effective argument as we could that taking action would save money.
Right.
It will in the long run.
Sure.
I actually think that the fires, because they've been horrific. They're horrific right now.
Yeah.
In Oregon and Northern California are actually helping the public recognize that these climate changes issues are real. That that heat dome, the heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, which I think shocked everyone. So I actually think I think the benefit of the awareness and the urgency it's creating to tackle climate change is outweighing any sort of loss of resources. There's still not nearly enough resources coming
Right.
to
Of
coastal
course.
communities, states, and government to solve or respond to the climate issues. Hopefully that, we can get into it in a bit, but there is some stuff in the Biden infrastructure plan that will help with that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Having that
California,
policies help for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
we've got a heavy lift to ensure that we have beaches in the United States in the future.
Yeah, no doubt. I should highlight too, when you mentioned sort of that heat wave in the Northwest, I've mentioned on a couple of other episodes, but just in case we get some listeners who didn't listen to that episode, just to highlight what that meant in terms of the heat. In British Columbia, you had power lines that were melting and asphalt that was actually buckling because they didn't build it for that heat. And that was the level of scariness in terms of the heat, not just people dying from just, having trouble breathing and not enough air conditioning or not enough cool weather around, infrastructure was being affected that you wouldn't expect in a heat wave like this. It'd probably be the last thing that we think about. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the level. It's not just forest fires, which obviously can be are the worst thing ever. But it's like this heat is getting really, really hot to the level where it's destroying infrastructure on top of forest fires, which I don't think people realize, is what's happening.
Well, another thing that I saw, which certainly startled me and shocked me, is that like millions and millions of creatures in the intertidal sort of literally baked to death.
Yeah.
So we have low tides. This marine life in the intertidal zones adapted to kind of surviving. They're really hardy, right? They can be exposed to the air. They can live underwater. They're in a very rough, turbulent environment, but they couldn't handle the heat. So, shellfish, starfish, all these, really important marine life were literally baked to death because they were exposed during those heat waves. And if someone asked me, like, what would the impacts of climate change on our coast be, I would have never get that. So no. It's also a lesson that there's going to be unintended consequences.
Absolutely. We'll get into that a little bit more, especially around the policy aspect that you mentioned. Sure. Having a federal government who's willing to put in the work and put in the policies to really help adapt to climate change and halt it or work to halt it. But it seems like a lot of your programs have gone from a reactionary approach where a lot of it was focused. I remember beach cleanups and so forth, and you kind of mentioned another few examples of being reactive, like fighting seawalls that had to be put up, and going into a more proactive approach, which kind of what we mentioned about trying to fight wildfires is it's a lot cheaper to protect and to be prepared and take that proactive approach than it is to react to something that's going to be too late, and it costs a lot of more money doing that, and so obviously that was on purpose. Did your sort of resource economics kind of play into that role, as well as the rest of the sort of the decision makers at Surfrider to go into that more proactive approach?
Yeah, one of the places where we actually employed this idea of using resource economics was during the Obama administration. There was a big effort, particularly on the East Coast, to do what they called regional ocean planning. Mm-hmm. So the idea was, hey, we have all these competing uses. You've probably talked about this on your show, but there's shipping lanes and there's fishing grounds, and we're starting to see more of it now. There's interest in renewable ocean energy, wind farms, and other things. We have all these uses going on, and historically the ocean's kind of been a free for all. Whereas on land, we're used to zoning, right? So we're like, hey, this is the industrial area, this is the residential zone, this is the commercial zone. So we intentionally put different activities in different places so that they don't conflict.
Right.
And so we received funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to actually add a ocean recreation layer to that data collection effort as a really important ocean use. And we were able to do a lot of economics around just how important that ocean recreation is to the economies of these coastal communities. And so there's a layer now, in this decision-making system that looks at beach going and surfing and kayaking and paddling and sailing and kiting and all those activities, and how important they are economically to these coastal communities. And so, as wind farms get proposed, the hope is we can put them in places where they're least likely to impact fishing, boating,
Right.
and ocean recreation. And in fact, in the early days before all that happened, there were a number of wind energy proposals. Then they put them all in front of state parks because there's no homeowners to fight them.
Right.
And we actually oppose those wind energy farms, even though we are generally pro renewable ocean energy, because we're like, hey, you're disproportionately impacting the public space that we have to recreate in front of, and we shouldn't have to suffer the impacts of these plans. It should be more comprehensive. So, it's an example of us, also shifting from like NIMBYism, no wind farm in front of our state park, to a regional ocean plan where we can think intelligently about how this is going to fit into all the other uses. And, that's starting to happen, which is positive.
Yeah, and I always turn to the regional plans was such a great idea, and it was really at the time. I remember I was just coming out of my master's when I was looking at marine MPAs, like marine protected areas, and that term marine spatial planning came out, and so it really kind of drove that sort of regional planning. And I always, when people ask, well, what is marine spatial planning? I always said it's a business plan for the ocean. Essentially, to make sure that for this agreement for the next 30, 40, 50 years, that people will be able to work together to, make sure that everything is done properly, decrease conflict, but also protect the environment at the same time and have a business plan. And I think BC did it as a province, did a great job of that, and they continue to work at it. It's adaptive and so forth, but it wasn't easy to put in. It's a long, tedious process because you're dealing with a lot of ocean users, and you want to make sure that everybody's got to make compromises, but you want to make sure everybody's happy. And so I believe California did the same thing, right? They kind of did the same kind of plan similar to that. And I don't know if it was all of California or just Southern California, but I believe they kind of went into a regional plan as well. And I think those are such important aspects of that. And I'm glad that Surfrider was able to be a part of that, to kind of place that. Now I have to ask too, with the way Surfrider works, so you have your sort of core staff, right? Like how many people work for that are not volunteers for Surfrider?
Yeah, that's grown too. We have 65 staff now.
Wow.
We're about a $10 million-ish a year organization. So we're firmly in the middle. We're bigger than a lot of the small grassroots organizations, and still significantly smaller than the ocean conservancies and oceanas of the world, which are 5-6 times our size. But like you said earlier, the power of Surfrider is this incredible network of 200 chapters and clubs. So we're able to get a tremendous amount of work done because we've got tens of thousands of volunteers on all coasts getting up every morning, thinking about making a positive difference in their community.
So that's sort of what I wanted to get into. So you have the people who work for it, and they all have their own specialties that contribute to the organization. But even like a staff of 65, with all the stuff that you're doing, you need people, you need help and stuff. So for volunteers, for anybody who's listening to this who wants to make a difference and may not be a volunteer for Surfrider but might be interested in the future, when people, I feel, and I might be wrong here, but when people think of volunteering, the first thing they think of is like, okay, work with an organization to do a beach cleanup, or maybe to at the most extreme in terms of wildlife is actually work with maybe some scientists to help some sea lions get free of plastic or so forth. What does it mean to volunteer for the Surfrider organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it really kind of runs the gamut. We have like entry-level volunteer activities up to our Jedi volunteers or ninjas. And, so you could show up at a beach cleanup and pick up trash for an hour and help contribute to that. And, we know we're not going to beach clean up our way out of the plastic pollution problem, but it's game changing to witness what you see on the beach. Mm-hmm. We collect data. So we collect data from all our beach cleanups. We know what we're finding, and we use that to inform policy. And it's a great recruitment tool. So a lot of people you talk to at Surfrider, it's a low bar of entry. Hey, I'm going to spend a couple hours on a Saturday morning. That's not a big commitment. But then, our chapters, many have been around for 20 years in their communities or longer. So they run, a volunteer community group. We're doing speaker series. We have community meetings. We're out there, like you said, picking up trash, testing water, planting gardens. We have a new program called Ocean Friendly Restaurants. We're getting restaurants to voluntarily, that's new too, since we spoke, voluntarily, give up single-use plastics. And we also do a lot of advocacy. So we have at any one time probably over 100 active local campaigns and communities. So this is banning single-use plastics in your community, advocating for better public access, could be opposing a bad project in their town. So ultimately, these volunteers evolve into community leaders. Mm-hmm. So they're almost running a small NGO equivalent in their community. And what we do is we provide them the organizing tools, the legal science and policy expertise. So we make toolkits, or we provide individual services to help them be effective at that work. So we do a lot of training, we provide a lot of resources and expertise. We have a lot of people that were in a high school club, went to a college club, they're now volunteering in a community, and some of them stick there and some of them go on to become environmental professionals too, which is like ultimately the best thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've heard of that happening quite a bit, more than you'd expect. People who have volunteered for Surfrider, and then all of a sudden they've gone into the profession because of their volunteer experience. And like I mentioned, I think I mentioned it before we press record, but I know some people who either head a chapter or are a part of a chapter anywhere around North America or in the country, and they're very proud of it. They have it on their profile. They talk about it quite a bit in like clubhouse rooms and so forth. And I think that speaks a lot to the organization, to the support that it provides, that you provide these volunteers. I think that's really important. That is part of the culture of Surfrider, is that pride in the organization and what you guys do. And I think it's not an easy thing to do especially with the amount of volunteers that you have, but it's probably has to do with a lot of the sort of Jedi volunteers that you mentioned earlier, to be able to continue that culture and foster those relationships and so forth. So I think that's absolutely wonderful.
I was going to just say there's sort of two things I think that are like fundamental to building a successful volunteer program. One is it's got to be fun. Right. So, we're dealing with serious issues, no question, but, we have protection and enjoyment in our mission statement. So we try to get people out there recreating in the ocean, surfing or whatever, or just making the volunteer activities fun. Right. So people need to seek enjoyment, and we build community so it becomes your friends. And two, you need to be making a difference, right? People want their sweat equity and their time to actually make a difference. And so, if we're out there making a difference, whether it's leaving a beach clean or passing meaningful policies at the local, state, and federal level, I think that source of pride comes from the fact that, like, hey, I'm out there actually making a positive difference. And so, if it's fun and you're making a difference, people are gonna be attracted to it and committed.
Absolutely. And I feel like now more than ever, especially within sort of younger people, is this Generation Z and younger. They're very into protecting the environment, taking pride in that, and going out there and making a difference. So I think that's it probably becomes a little easier when you have people who are willing to put themselves out there and dedicate a lot of time to it. So that's fantastic. Definitely. But let's talk about let's talk about climate change right now. We have sea level rise, a new president that has come in, with new federal initiatives, quite a number of initiatives that are targeted towards climate change. We had a little bit of a gap, about 4 years, with good climate change policy. The Obama administration was, especially towards the end of their last term, were very focused on climate change. They called it sort of the number one threat to the U.S. The Navy was calling it that. We had a bit of a gap for 4 years. Now there's a new president that was part of that Obama administration. Climate change is back. The Paris Accord is back in the United States. And so there's a lot of really exciting things. So for Surfrider, what is exciting to you guys that you're like, and that provides you with the tools and the framework to work to help fight climate change?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. We were fighting offshore drilling for 4 years under Trump, and now we're actually getting back to solving the problems. And it's notable that having addressing climate change was in the top 4 pillars of the Biden administration's platform. That's the first time in U.S. history that climate change has had that level of a priority. So that alone is really significant. It was COVID, the economy, jobs, and equity and climate change. So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's manifested itself in a couple things. One is this America the Beautiful plan, this idea that, we need to protect 30% of our land and water by 2030 to kind of both avoid the mass extinction crisis we're facing and also address climate change. So they put out a plan, the Biden administration, called the America the Beautiful plan, that is sort of the call to action to do that work. So that's a big part of it. And so how do we effectively protect 30% of our land and water? And that process is just beginning. I think it's very stakeholder driven. There's a big recreation focus too, which I think is really positive. They want people out using. So historically, I think, conservation plans were like protect the ocean, not the people. And this is a people-oriented conservation program, which is also a significant difference, which is really important.
Absolutely.
So that's great. And then, the other thing is, we heard a lot about the Green New Deal.
Yes.
Well, we need a Blue New Deal too, right? And so there's actually a plug for another podcast, How to Save a Planet with Ayanna Johnson.
Yes, very good. Yeah.
Great podcast. She told a story of the kind of like the origin of the Blue New Deal. And, that was a way of getting oceans
right
incorporated in climate, because historically, sadly enough, it's 70% of the planet, as you well know, and our sort of climate action was all focused on land.
Yeah.
And so, the oceans can also be, they are wreaking, or, they're suffering from the impacts of climate change, but they can also be part of the solution. They absorb a lot of heat, a lot of carbon. Blue carbon, our coastal ecosystems, our kelp, mangroves, and wetlands are really powerful at sequestering carbon. And so there's also a bill out there right now called the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act.
Oh, great.
That's the Blue New Deal in legislative form. And it does a number of really important things, like ban oil and gas drilling off our coastlines, protects these coastal habitats, puts a lot of money into coastal adaptation, and promotes renewable ocean energy as a way of, finding carbon-free sources of energy. And so it's a pretty comprehensive bill. That is something we're supporting. So if you go on our website, surfrider.org, you can take action and support the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. So between that and these 30 by 30 efforts, and I guess third, there's a lot of good climate sort of stuff in the big infrastructure package that's coming to electrify, clean energy standard, electrify the grid, and a bunch of other things that are more focused on energy consumption. But, with those three things, I think I'm pretty optimistic that if we can get those done, we're gonna take a quantum leap in the United States kind of ability to reduce carbon emissions, stave off the worst impacts, and hopefully get to us a place where we're the climate impacts are moderate, not severe. And
Yes.
so, you know, climate change is a big, scary issue, but I'm actually somewhat optimistic that we can get this done and make a difference. So it's really exciting. I think a lot of people were surprised that Biden, who was perceived as being a pretty moderate guy,
Mm-hmm.
is taking bold action, which we need, right? We're feeling these impacts. Like we're finally there
Yeah.
where people are like, uh-oh, this is real, whether it's floods or the fires or the heat waves. We're probably 30 years too late, but better late than never.
For sure. And it's unfortunate that it has become a political issue in not only the US, Canada as well, all over the world. It's become a political issue. It shouldn't be a political issue. It's just, this is happening. We got to do something about it. But the question that I always have, and I think a lot of my audience members kind of feel this as well, is when you have these policies, from a federal level or even state levels as well, because I know California has a lot of policies towards, reducing climate change and so forth. But for like an organization like Surfrider, you get like this sort of Blue New Deal kind of act, right? And how do you guys utilize that? How does Surfrider utilize that to embed into their programs and then have like an outrage, like, the 30 by 30? Are you involved by using sort of is it just the sort of the policies and the legal aspect of those acts to maybe implement more reserves or MPAs along the coastline, or is it more funds come towards Surfrider to be able to dedicate more time and more resources to that? How does Surfrider get impacted by these types of things, and other organizations as well, of course?
So it's a really good question, because you think about these policies, they're like literally just words on a piece of paper, and
right.
So like how does we go from that to like real world stuff happening on the ground, which is actually kind of where we're at our best, is
right.
Implementing things on the ground. And so I think at a meta level, we can stop fighting offshore drilling which we've been doing for the last like 10, 12 years. And so we can take all those resources from that fight and shift them to these more proactive things. So that's good.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that just off the table.
Definitely.
And then I think it comes to things like, hey, if we're going to support renewable ocean energy and we're going to try to put wind farms off our coastlines, one side thinks that's industrialization of the ocean, other side thinks that's a new source of carbon-free energy. So when they plan, we just supported a wind farm off Eastern Long Island. So when that plan is proposed, we can get in those communities and help educate them on what the plan likes. We can send in comment letters and talk about designing it in such a way that it's going to minimize impacts. It conforms with the regional ocean plan, and do a lot of grassroots organizing to both ensure the project's done right and garner appropriate community support for a plan like that. So, if there's money in these plans to create renewable ocean energy, we can help make sure that communities have a say in how those are done and be supportive, while still holding them to high standards. So that's one example. And then, in 30 by 30, in the United States, there's basically 3 ways that we can implement marine protected areas. We can pass state laws or do it administratively at the state level, the 3-mile border, which is what California did. We can establish national marine sanctuaries, which is a federal program.
Right.
So there's a proposal off Southern California right now to create the...
I'm having trouble.
Siri again, always listening.
I know. Off Santa Barbara coast, there's the proposal to create the Chumash, which is the Native American peoples of that region, named after them, National Marine Sanctuary. Or third, we can do it through monuments. So
right.
The Antiquities Act allows presidents to,
right.
create national monuments. Bears Ears was the one Trump was trying to undo.
Yeah.
But like the Northwest Hawaiian Islands National Monument is the largest marine protected area in the United States. It's federal waters.
Right.
And so again, we can, we're advocating in our local, with our local community chapters in Southern California for the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary, and trying to convince NOAA and the, regulatory agencies that that's a good thing to do and it has community support. And we can help research and do groundwork also to build local support for national monuments as those get proposed. And we're involved in these marine protected area establishment issues in Puerto Rico and
Right.
Oregon and Washington. So those are ways we can plug in. And I'm actually, the marine reserves and MPAs that were established in the past were hugely divisive. It was the fishing community versus the environmentalists in many cases, or the ocean conservationists. And I'm kind of hopeful that we can find some ways to improve that process, and kind of the principles involved in the Biden plan, I think, call for a more balanced approach and a more human-centric approach. So I might be naive, but I'm kind of hopeful we can build some really solid protections, eliminate the worst impacts to the ocean, still allow sustainable fishing to occur when it can occur. Because I think fishing gets lumped in a lot, and the United States actually has a pretty good track record of managing our fisheries. It's actually the other fisheries out there in other nations that are the biggest offenders.
Right.
So anyway, those are some examples, I think, where we can take 30 by 30, the efforts to fund climate initiatives, and we can help bring those things to the ground, ensure that local communities are actually playing a role, and get down to the brass tacks of how these things actually get implemented.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like one thing needs to be said too is you guys, you talk about, getting laws passed and getting MPAs done. You must have, like, the Surfrider must have a great relationship with, at the political level on all the sort of the state, maybe even local, state and federal levels. Do you guys work at that in terms of getting in touch and presenting politicians with data, to present so that, hey, here's a marine protected area that we would like to get designated or a marine sanctuary? Or is that more of a group thing, and you guys do a lot of the groundwork, the community work, and then pass it on with a collaborator and they pass it on to the politics? Or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit of both, but almost every sort of major conservation initiative we're involved in is through a coalition and collaborators, right? And so, we're arguably the strongest, if not the only, sort of national on the ground grassroots ocean and coastal conservation group. So that's really, and we have a recreational component. So that's really our sort of strength. We've got great science and policy people on staff, but other organizations, the Ocean Conservancy or NRDC, maybe have more sort of science experts or policy wonks in state capitals or DC.
Right.
So when it's done right, we all kind of play to our strengths and work collaboratively. That said, I think, one of the strengths of Surfrider is, we're real world people that are constituents of these elected officials. So, my city council in Laguna Beach, they all know who I am because I'm down at those city council meetings advocating. We just passed a comprehensive plastic foodware ban, and I'm down there talking to them about it. We do Ocean Day in Sacramento.
Yep.
And we bring our people there. And then we do, for about 5 years now, we've been doing Coastal Recreation Hill Day. So we bring about 160 of our student clubs and activists from around the country to DC to do Hill Day meetings. And, we're constituents. So when you go to the meeting, I'm talking to, Michelle Steele or my current representative, or Harley Ruda, Mike Levin, just to the south of us. And so, what's great is when they talk to us, we're people that live in their district.
Right.
And we're advocating for things that we want to see there, in coordination across our network. So I think, we're not we're not necessarily, nothing against our fellow ocean conservation groups, but, a bunch of policy wonks, economists, lawyers in DC, just, they're super valuable because they're some of the smartest people on solving these problems.
Right.
But they're not necessarily in someone's district, and they're like, hey, wow, they've got a couple thousand members in my district. I should probably pay attention to these guys.
Absolutely.
So I think that, and we make an effort to engage with those folks, do it professionally, and also be solution oriented. I I think one of the things about local advocacy is that, you're going to bump into the people at the city council meeting or in the supermarket next week. And so you really have to be advocating for practical solutions. They can't be pie in the sky. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of laughable. So I think the grassroots nature also keeps the work pragmatic and solution oriented. Because if you're just pie in the sky, it's not going to really hold.
Yeah, I love that aspect. It's sort of like you are citizens of the people in that district, and I think that makes a difference. You're living through it, you're seeing it firsthand, and you have the stories to back it up. Like why you love the district that you're in, why you love the city that you live in, why you love the beach that you always frequent, surfing area or swimming area, coastline, and how you want people to have access to that and so forth. And I think that becomes really important. And yes, there are professional lobbyists that do some great things, but on the other hand, like you need the politicians need to speak to their people, the people that elected them there, or maybe not, but they're still involved in that community. I think that's really important. I think that really sums up Surfrider. You guys have spent a long time investing in a great, army of volunteers across the country, and it's only expanding. And people have pride in it. People are happy, but they want their areas to be protected, and having the people there, seeing it for themselves, being able to connect with them at any time, I think is truly important. And then when you have that army, and you want to make a difference and you want somebody to listen, well, hey, let's go to Connecticut and let's talk to the people, talk to our volunteers there. Cause we want to put a Marine Reserve in that area, and they can talk about why they want to do that. Or, there's a bad water quality thing. We didn't even know about it, but so-and-so from these volunteer chapter, said that this is something that's good. I just think that's really great. I think it sums up Surfrider and the work that you do, in a perfect form. And Chad, I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done, the hard work that you've put in, and your team. It's been fantastic. I can't wait to have more of the team on. I think it's something that people need to know. I think people need to find out, about these organizations and really get to know who they are, what their passions are, and how hard they work to get all this stuff done. This is not an easy thing to do by any means. You talk about how you guys are passing like hundreds of bills. That's a lot of work that goes into that, and so thank you for that. And I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and being so open and transparent with us. And I can't wait to have you back on.
Well, Andrew, it's been a pleasure. I'm thrilled to see that you've had so much success with this thing. I can't believe you're over 1,100, almost nearing 1,200 podcasts.
Crazy.
So,
Crazy.
Thank you. I still think like this, it's a privilege to do the work that I do, and I love it. And it's fun to make a difference. And, the ocean has been so important to me that, I feel like, me and everyone else who loves it should try to make a difference. And so it's gratifying work. But
yeah, absolutely.
Speaking to you.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing. We'll have to do this again a lot sooner than the last gap in years, because there's so much going on. We'll have to find out more details, but this was a good sort of reminder of what Surfrider does, and I can't wait to have you back on to hear more.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Chad, for being on the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. Really appreciate you coming out and talking to us about Surfrider, and I'm so happy with all of your success, not only becoming CEO, becoming a PhD, while being a parent of like 4-year-old twins. That's insane. But also the work that Surfrider's done, the growth that it's made over the past number of years. I'm just can't wait to see what the future outcome is. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, I'm looking forward to having more of the colleagues of Chad's within Surfrider out to talk about Surfrider, talk about some of their programs in more detail, and find out how you can become a volunteer at Surfrider. They have a number of chapters in the U.S. They have one in British Columbia as well, and they're really well done. And I think it's really important to talk about that and how volunteers become a really important part of a nonprofit organization, especially these days when it's very difficult to get the funding to really go out and, pound the pavement or pound the beaches to get that plastic out of the environment. So thanks again, Chad, for being on the show. And if you have any questions or comments, you can DM me on Instagram. I love having conversations with people on Instagram. You can also go to speakupforblue.com. Just click on the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast logo because it's our network podcast website there. And you can just click on the contact button. I will be there. There's a link in the show notes if you want to contact me through there. If you also want to leave a voice message on our website, you can do that. There's a little icon down below when you get to the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast page. You can leave a voicemail for me, and I'll be covering that, I believe, in the next episode. Hopefully, we'll be covering that very, very shortly. There was somebody who left a message in July, and I want to address that. So we are getting, there's ways to communicate with me. There's always ways. Twitter, TikTok, whatever you'd like. I think it's really important. Anyway, I want to thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. And again, thanks again to Chad and Surfrider for being so open and transparent. And thank you very much for listening. And if you know someone who wants to listen to this, pass it on. Pass it on. We're on every podcast app you can think of. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. We will talk to you soon. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day and happy conservation.